honourable leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague, the Conservative leader, is right when he points out that Statistics Canada this week has reported that here in Nova Scotia we have the worst child poverty of any province. But what he has said is, in fact, incomplete. The situation is, in fact, quite a bit darker than that. Not only are we 10th out of 10 in all the provinces, it is also the case, it has been reported this week, that 9 of those provinces are improving their position on child poverty. Only 1 of the provinces is going backwards on this subject, and that is ours. And so I want to ask the Premier, does he agree with me that these figures on child poverty released in the last few days by Statistics Canada stand as a gross indictment of his government's record?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we too saw the stats that you're referring to. We've seen, Mr. Speaker, that in Nova Scotia, the rate around poverty is declining amongst our seniors, Mr. Speaker. We've seen the rate of poverty in those same stats are declining in and around single-parent families, Mr. Speaker. We also are troubled by the stats, Mr. Speaker. We've asked Stats Canada to demonstrate where they came up with those numbers, quite simply, because, Mr. Speaker, we've continued to invest year after year in ensuring whether it's rent supplements to help low-income Nova Scotians. The largest single increase in income assistance, Mr. Speaker, happened under our government. We continue to make investments in low-income housing, Mr. Speaker, but we too are troubled and share his concern. We're going to continue to work and find ways to ensure that we support the most vulnerable in our province, Mr. Speaker. It is why, when we had an opportunity, after getting back to balance, after this province had been run through successive deficit governments, the first tax cut we gave, Mr. Speaker, was to the vulnerable Nova Scotians when we issued, Mr. Speaker, around the basic personal exemption, and low-income Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, received the biggest benefit of that.
Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier wants to have an inquiry as to why we are the one province in this category. I can answer the inquiry: because we have the lowest minimum wage in Canada, because at a time when we have 20% of our people paying over 50% of their income in rent, we have no rent control, because we, in social assistance, over 6 years, increased the income assistance rates only by a total of $20. That's the formula for being the only province that's in the tank on solving child poverty. That's how they did it. And furthermore, last week we read that our Premier in Nova Scotia has the highest salary top-up of any Premier in the country, while this week we read that from Statistics Canada that the median income of the people of Nova Scotia is the lowest in the entire country. And so I do want to ask the Premier, does he not think that at some foundational level something is out of sync and out of whack when he's at the very top, while his government's decisions keep so many people at the very bottom?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank the honourable member for the question, Mr. Speaker. The reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, we've seen more people joining the workforce, Mr. Speaker, in successive years. We've seen more young people choose to live in Nova Scotia than leave, Mr. Speaker. We've continued to see the financial picture of our province improve, Mr. Speaker. Not only is it being recognized here, it's being recognized nationally, Mr. Speaker. To continue the work that we're doing in transformation and income assistance, Mr. Speaker. What we know doesn't work, Mr. Speaker. What we know doesn't work is what the NDP did, Mr. Speaker, was ignore every problem, write a check for everything they could find, and find no solutions to the things that were impacting families at home, Mr. Speaker. It's why we've continued to improve, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we continue to invest when we have an opportunity. Those citizens in this province, that they stood in this House, Mr. Speaker, they stood in this House when we tried to ensure that those of us who are doing okay, Mr. Speaker, slowed down the wage growth so we can invest in vulnerable Nova Scotians. They voted against it. I hear one of the honourable members talking about my own salary, Mr. Speaker. I want to tell her it was set by a Conservative Premier and it was reinforced by a New Democratic Premier, and I have not changed the salary of my job in 7 years.